Okay, thanks for having me out to CDTM. I love the work that you guys are doing here. And I also love this model that you have. Ooh, don't shout too loud there. I love this model that you've got of really interdisciplinary work and project-based work. I used to be an academic myself, and one of my big complaints was that universities had kind of lost sight of what their mission was in the digital age. Because when we look at how the university is set up, I mean, we look at the university like, think about how this room is set up, right? You've got all of these chairs that are kind of lined up facing this direction. And what this whole room says is that this environment is based around information scarcity, which is where universities came from, right? When we looked at universities 400, 500 years ago, you didn't have knowledge everywhere. You had books that were in the library, and those were the only books around. You had to come here to learn things. You had to come and face the professor at the front who is the expert. And all of that has blown up, and most universities are way, way behind on that. So I think it's an exciting thing that you're doing. We can get into more of that. That's partly what motivated me to get into my studies. So a little bit about my background. I have this weird background of, I used to be a broadcast engineer for CBS television. Then I went into international politics. Then I was studying some ethnography and sociology. So my passion was always trying to figure out what is going on in the world and how can I teach students? How can I connect to students so that we can actually build things and solve problems and get out there? And so I was doing a project with a colleague of mine in northern Kenya about 6 years ago. And we were looking at social change in a remote area. And while we were there, we were thinking about the students that we had back in the classrooms that we were kind of writing off little emails to, telling them what happened. And we were so frustrated by how totally removed the email was from the experience. And this is the way we would teach these subjects, right? The students would read about some ceremony, and then they would maybe see a photograph of it, and then we'd ask questions of it. But when we think about how we're actually doing that work, we're doing the work by having the experience first and being totally confused. And then we're trying to ask ourselves and answer what is going on, what happened here. That's really the process of learning, not knowing what's happening, struggling with something, and then through that process of trying to make sense of it, you generate knowledge, right? So we were thinking, how do we connect students to this experience? And we were thinking, we had all these crazy ideas, like what if we could have 2 cameras and they face different ways and we could take pictures, like 360 things, things you can just buy on Amazon now for $100. We were like thinking of how we could do this to create some immersive experience for the students. And that led us to looking at virtual reality and looking at the history of virtual reality. And we came across the work of this guy. If you're interested in VR, if you're interested in crazy people with amazing ideas, watch one of these guys' lectures. Like, he gives a presentation to a major audience of like CEOs, and he sits there and the first 5 minutes are like playing some ancient musical instrument in a really weird, like atonal melody. And he's like, I think he's just fucking with people, right? He's just getting in their heads, like getting them all confused because he thinks if anybody sticks around after this, they're going to listen. And this guy was like the godfather of virtual reality. This is the guy who worked for NASA Ames way back in the day that built the very first virtual reality environments that were working with these massive headsets and building the first avatars. Like, he coined the phrase, the words, virtual reality. Like, those were the things that came out of his mouth to describe what they were doing. And one of his ideas that I want to kind of bring through the course of this little talk here is this idea that we don't want to focus so much on the technology, right? The technology is interesting, there are interesting questions there, but the more interesting question is how does that technology change us? How does it impact the social world? How does it change culture? Technology and culture, I believe, are what we call co-creative forces. That is, they're always interacting with each other. We can see this pretty dramatically in this last US election. What would this US election have been like without social media? Probably fundamentally different, right? The technology changes the culture. The culture affects the technology. It works in this continuous loop. So, and one way to look at this, I love this little drawing here, talking about the evolution of man, to where we are right now. I would argue that we are in this weird technology trap right now, where when I talked about 400 or 500 years ago and the problem of the universities was information scarcity. And information technology that we created, the computers, the smartphones, the social networks, all of these devices and all of this sort of network that we've created was created to solve that problem of information scarcity. How do we get knowledge from any person to any other person? And we've come up with amazing solutions to that, right? All the world's knowledge is available to anybody who has a connected device. But now we're in a different trap, which is that we have all this incredible technology that constantly connects us to information, but the nature and design of the interface itself disconnects us from our own bodies, and it disconnects us from our environments. And what we're learning about how we make sense of the world, like if you want to look at a really crazy cool area of study, look at something called embodied cognition. Okay, embodied cognition is the study of how do we cognate the world around us. And it's an argument that the way we understand anything is a combination of a mind, a body, and an environment working as a system. We need all three of those things to make sense of the world. This is focused on the mind. It cuts off the body, it cuts off the environment. And I think we're going to look back at this period of time in 30 years or in 40 years, and we're going to think of this as a very strange, primitive time when everyone was compressed into these little devices. I hurt my back a couple weeks ago. I ended up in the hospital 2 weeks ago, really scared. First time I've been in the hospital in a long time. The doctor was like, all right, do you feel anything strange in your legs? Anything tingling? No. Did you pee your pants? No. Okay, you're going to be fine. But after 2 weeks of laying on my back, I realized, one, how often I wanted to look at my smartphone, and two, that when I looked at my smartphone, my back pain got worse. Okay, what's happening there? So my body is hypersensitive through these last 2 weeks. And all I'm feeling constantly is this tensing of my body when I'm narrowing my focus through this interface. So one of the things that I think is really cool is we did not come from this environment, right? This is the environment we came from. This is what we've had over the last several million years of our evolution. Actually, this is where I came from. This is a photo of Colorado in the United States. All right? And you think about what we had to do when we were navigating this environment over a long, long period of time. This is an incredibly rich environment of information, but it's spatial information, right? So we make sense of the world through this spatial relationship. We're constantly finding paths. We're having to remember, where is there water? Where is there food? Where were there berries? Where did I see that bear last time? We're having to tell people about it. Okay, over the rocks and past that big tree, remember that one? Yeah, okay, then there's a bear. He lives in a cave over here, so we want to go over on this side, right? We had to make sense of the world through these spatial relationships. And our spatial cognition and our memory that's connected to spaces is incredibly powerful. It is way more powerful than our ability to remember text, than our ability to remember sort of these rational focused documents, these artifacts that we've created to transfer knowledge. Our spatial relationships, our spatial memory, superpowered. Okay, and this is also how we learn, right? We learn, again, through that combination of mind, body, and environment in a social context. One of the reasons that human beings, that Homo sapiens, have the brains that are as large as they have, and one of the reasons they are such a socially dominant creature across the entire world, is because we are one of the species that has the longest period of time in which to play. Right? Play, hopefully you're getting this at CDTM, play is way underrated as a method of learning. play is super underrated as a way of growing and a way of understanding the social world. So we have this incredible ability that we connect to each other in a social environment, we connect to our own bodies, right? This connection to our minds, our bodies, and the environments is what makes us us and is what gives us our power. And our technology right now cuts us off. And here's something else that's really, really interesting. When you look at the research that's being done on the human mind, and you look at the research that's being done on the connection between, say, emotion and memory, we get to some really interesting, crazy things. One of them is that there is a misconception that emotion is something that happens in your head. Right? Like, I'm feeling angry, and you're like, anger is happening in my brain. No, anger is not happening in your brain. Anger is happening in your body. These are body maps that were done over 6 different cultures. And over these 6 different cultures, what they asked people to do is rate areas of higher or lower sensitivity when they were prompted to feel certain types of emotion. And when you map that out over brain scans to actually see what's happening, the body is creating a sensation and the mind is interpreting it. The mind is saying, oh, I think I feel anger. I think I feel sadness. Emotions are happening here and they're interpreted by here. Oh, and these things are absolutely core to learning. If you want to learn anything, like studying texts is a very difficult way to do it. Now, it's a powerful way to understand certain types of information, right? It's a powerful way to get certain types of knowledge into your head. But if you really want to do deep learning and remember what's happening, it must be connected to an emotion. So this is a video, hopefully it'll play. Ooh. You can just turn that off. Okay, I don't need any sound on that. What we have here is we have a video. This is a video, one of the first videos ever made that is showing synapses being created, okay? This is showing how the brain is growing and it's showing the biological process of memory. So these are synapses that are reaching out, they're forming connections, and at the point when they meet and they think there's important information to exchange, they create a little like bump. And that bump becomes a point where those 2 neurons are always connected and always capable of exchanging information. Right? And what they found, this is, by the way, the work of Eric Kandel. He's a Nobel Prize winner in biology for understanding the biological roots of memory. What they found out is that when you have emotion connected to learning, that synapse process is multiplied. That is, emotion is key to the development of strong memories. It's one of the reasons why if people ask you your phone number, like, okay, you don't need your phone number anymore, right? But it's almost harder to remember than what you remember out of the first episode of Game of Thrones. Really, I mean, it's funny, but it's not, right? Because Game of Thrones is full of emotion. And as you experience that emotion, you deepen those synaptic connections. You deepen the process that builds in memory. Okay, and this becomes really, really cool once we get to these new technologies. Because these new technologies are tapping into that loop, into that brain, body, and environment loop. Okay? So we've got virtual reality, we've got augmented reality. What these are, if we want to put them as a group, they're spatial computing technologies, right? They essentially work because they are using information in space, which is very much how we make sense of the world already. Okay, that's a cool step. But let me get into this, and let me get into what I think maybe the social impact of this is going to be. So I'll first have like a little demo. Yeah, sorry, keep turning off the sound. So this is something that was released like 2 days ago by Google. Google released their Google Earth is now in VR, which is actually pretty awesome. So you put on the headset, it's tracking you in space, and it's building this entire environment around you. You can go anywhere in the world you want to go. And as you go into that world, you can interact with it in full 3-dimensional space, which is, yeah, it's cool, but it's also the way we're always making sense of the world, right? So here's a really cool application using these massive, beautiful data sets that is able to connect us to information in ways that goes beyond just this sort of rational environment of looking at flat pictures, reading text about it, having something that cuts us off from a truly environmental experience. So this is wicked cool. So people building out spaces, that's one of the first things that they're doing, right? But there's also, as with any technology, there are a lot of bad ideas that come out. A lot of people are trying to build out like the Iron Man kind of interface with VR, AR, which is they think like, oh cool, the information is all around us. Now I can have like 100 smartphone screens around me. and I think the experience is a lot like Tony Stark's face here. It's like sadness and confusion. As a general design rule, I would ask all of you, please do not just throw more shit out around us. Think of what it is you want that person to experience, what you want them to make sense of. And to do that, we have to go back to how we make sense of the world with other things, right? The new technology is just a new little device that allows us to do what we've already done very well in a different way. So I'm going to show you some other applications of VR that I think are much more interesting, much cooler, and dig down into us in a way that I think hacks us and opens up the ability to understand each other and the ability to understand ourselves in new ways. That's what I think the social impact of these technologies will be. So, and I go back when I look at research, there's been 40 years of research on VR. Like it's not like a topic like smartphones where everyone is like, it's new to everyone. Serious researchers in computer science and psychology have been looking at this stuff for 40 years, right? So they've got really great papers and experiments. This one was done at UCL in London. I did this experiment myself. It's very, very trippy. They have an experiment where they put you into a room, like a virtual pub, and they have two people who come in, and you start interacting with them. They've got head tracking, so their heads follow you. And just having an avatar come in and you're standing in front of it is a very strange experience. Because on a cognitive level, like on a conscious level, you know this is a computer program, this is not really happening. On an unconscious level, your brain is saying something weird is happening. There's a person in front of me and I just put my finger through their face. Whoa! So these people start fighting in this situation. They start getting into it. And what they wanted to measure is how bystanders' response to simulated violence. You can't do this study very well in a normal situation because it's really unethical. You can do it in a virtual environment and it becomes really interesting. What they do is they hook you up to galvanic skin response measures, which measure like sweat and stress response. They have a pulsometer, they have a camera above, and you watch people's reactions and something really interesting happens. People start sweating, their pulse shoots up. People physically try to separate the people who are fighting. What? Like you wouldn't, I don't think you would. You're not going to step in front of your TV and like try to stop people from fighting on TV, right? But in this virtual environment, because it's spatial and because your brain is tracking it, it's kind of overriding the part of your brain that's conscious that says this isn't happening. A much deeper part of your brain is saying, oh, this is happening. And so companies are actually trying new ways of leveraging this power and using it to do really cool things like create empathy. The New York Times has done a wonderful series called The Displaced. If anyone has the ability to check this out, please, please, please check out if you get a Google Cardboard, or you can check it out with the new Google Daydream, like any of these like head-mounted displays. They've done a series called The Displaced, which is 360 stereoscopic video of refugees talking about their experience. Having it around you, having it three-dimensional, triggers that part of the brain that thinks it's real, and it merges the real and unreal parts of your brain into a much more powerful emotional experience. So I put this on my mother who's like, yeah, I read about refugee experiences. Oh, it's really sad, it's really tragic. Okay, check this out. She puts it on, she takes it off and she's crying. I asked the person at the New York Times magazine who was behind this project, I said, oh yeah, my mom tried it out and she cried. He said, everybody cries. Literally, we put it on 1,000 people in a row and 1,000 people cried. This is much more powerful than what we're doing with our writing. You know, it's up to us to learn how to use these tools to kind of reach the aims that we want to reach. This is powerful stuff. There's this really great guy, Karim Ben Khalifa, who's a war journalist, and what he's been doing now for some time is he's been going across conflict areas and recognizing that, you know, when I go to Israel and I'm about to go into the Gaza Strip, all the Israelis tell me, oh, be careful, those people are crazy. And then after about 3 weeks in Gaza, when I'm about to go back to Israel, all the Gazans tell me, oh, be careful, those people are crazy. So he's hearing the same things across these different lines of combatants. And so what he created this really amazing project where what he's done is he's taken combatants from different sides of major conflicts, and he's done like 3D scans and sort of simulated videos of them doing interviews, asking them questions. And the questions are always the same. Who is your enemy? When was the first time that you knew they were your enemy? You know, how do you know that they're your enemy now? Like, it kind of goes on. And then he puts this in a VR room. And as you walk into the room, you see these two guys standing there. And if you walk up to one of them, you hear them tell their story. And then you walk over to the other one, and they tell you the same story. And what it creates is this very deep sense of empathy and this sense of confusion for a lot of people, even soldiers, that realize, oh, you know what, a lot of what we have in our heads is kind of misguided because we don't have the direct contact with people. We don't have this ability to learn from them. We're learning about them through media that compresses out the right emotions. So we're very confused. This guy, Ben Debevec, he's doing some really amazing work with doing live capture, the same style of thing. And they're doing this really amazing, sophisticated thing. It's a little bit crazy high-tech, but they're doing these massive scanned videos of people. They've done this on Holocaust survivors. And what they do is they keep them in this space and they interview them for about 2 weeks. I mean, they do like 90 hours of recording. And then they codify the answers. And they put them into an artificial intelligence system. And they take this around to schools. And they have this really cool projection system, so the projection looks like it's the person sitting in the room. And the artificial intelligence, like Siri, students ask questions, and this guy just responds to the questions. And the experience is like you're talking to the person. Okay, I will suggest that in 15 to 20 years, you are going to have some version of this for your parents. You're going to be able to have conversations with them after they have died. I know, it's a little weird, right? So this merging of these technologies, this reality capture, the artificial intelligence, the ability to project it in realistic ways, is going to create some very, very strange things. But hopefully that change and improve the way we understand each other, the way we connect to each other, and the way we understand ourselves. I'll give you one last experiment. I promise I'm not going to go too much longer. This was an experiment that was done at the Stanford Virtual Human Interaction Lab, and they wanted to understand how does virtually interacting with yourself change you. So what they did is they created these same like realistic scans of people, and then they artificially aged them. In the experiment, you put on the goggles, you walk into the room, you stand in front of a virtual mirror, and you see an older version of yourself. And then you have a conversation with that older you. Okay, now they did this with 2 groups of students. One group of students got to interact with the older version of themselves. One group got to interact with the normal version of themselves. Do you think there would be any difference in their behavior after the experiment? What do you think? You say yes, yes. What do you think would change?
I think they would be a lot more thoughtful about what they did with their life.
Okay, you think they'd be a lot more thoughtful about what they did with their life? How do you think that would express itself in behavior?
Kindness.
So they might be more kind to themselves? Where do you think you would see it? where do you think you would see that kindness?
In interaction with other people.
Okay, so maybe they would interact with other people in different ways. They would be measurably kinder to other people.
But also to themselves.
Okay.
I think the people who would have interacted with the younger versions would also act like the younger versions and vice versa.
So they would kind of mirror the same things. They wouldn't change very much.
I think you would see it would become apparent, like from a more objective standpoint, how you age with self-limiting beliefs.
Okay, so you think that you would see these self-limiting beliefs. Do you think that would cause people to challenge them?
I don't think it would challenge. I think it would allow people to break the beliefs much earlier in life and to watch themselves age with them.
So you think they would be able to break self-limiting beliefs earlier? Yeah. Can you think of any example? Can you think of any way that you would say, like, there's maybe where we could measure that change?
I mean, wouldn't you be able to go and put on like a MEG or something and see the blood flow?
Okay, so you want to go super sophisticated. You want to like hack the brain and get in and watch. I want to look at your soul now. Okay. All right, I like the way you think. They did, yes.
I think that would be different basically towards the time. Like it could be a bit more decision-wise, more decisive, more actionable.
Okay, so they might have like a different decision bias. By the way, Prost, everyone. Cheers. Don't hesitate to drink in this. I'm not offended. Okay, so they might have different like decision biases that you would see. Can you think of a concrete example?
Like you can think of your achievements, the time you spend, and how you use the time that you have.
Okay, so more reflective things. You think you would see them reflecting on their lives more? Okay. Here's a funny experimental observation. The group that interacted with the older version of themselves saved twice as much money over the following year as the group that only interacted with the younger version of themselves. Long-term behavioral change from a 20-minute experiment. Okay? We're in the very early stages of this, but what we're seeing is like this door kind of cracking open to something potentially very powerful, which is a way of reflecting on ourselves that we haven't had before. That's cool. So some commercial VR companies, some startups, like this one's called Altspace VR, what they're doing I think is a really cool thing. They just launched this yesterday in like a test version. They have something that you can go in, you can like animate these avatars and move them around and interact. But what they've done now is they've created the ability to record those scenes. So you get your avatar moving around, you're animating it, you finish the recording, you step back, and then you watch yourself. And you can like take things virtually out of your hands, very like trippy things. But what we're able to do, and I think this is just the beginning stages, again, we're creating an ability to reflect on ourselves in a way that we haven't before. And I think this is going to have huge implications for things like sports performance, for things like doing performance training, for reducing the anxiety about talking to people if you're up in front of a group because you're able to see what it's like. You see yourself as a different person. You can empathize potentially more with yourself. Again, I don't know where this is going to go, but I do know that this is something that's pretty cool. This is how we're applying it in my company, in the work that we're doing. We have a project right now with the Royal Opera House in London, and their challenge is how do we bring this art form out to the world in a way that reaches new audiences and is relevant to them? And how do we use this new technology in-house? So what we've done is we've done some cool technology tests working with a startup out of Saarbrücken that does live video capture that actually creates spatial data just from cameras using machine vision. And we're playing with this idea of what can we get if we capture the performance and we allow anyone to step into that performance. That performance can happen around you. That performance can happen through you. There's really cool experiments that have been done by Stanford on students learning yoga in VR. Because something you can do, there's something you can do in VR that you can't do anywhere else, and that is you can step inside the body of someone else. So they compared students who learned through VR, who learned from a live teacher, and who learned from a video. And the students who learn in VR got to step inside the kind of semi-transparent body of the yoga instructor and make the poses and see like, okay, yeah, there's the pose. And it deepens the muscle memory, I promise, because those students learn 30% faster than students who learned from a live teacher. Crazy. So we're playing with this idea of what can we do now that we have these new ways to capture and share information. And this is showing like live skeletal tracking just based purely on video. So it's got 8 cameras around. And then from that, we can create a live avatar mapping. It's a little clunky right now, but the idea of it is we can use cheap available technologies to create kind of breakthrough experiences. And what does this mean if we can take this out into the world and anybody in the world who tries on one of these things can be on the stage at the Royal Opera House, can be in the middle of a performance, can see what it's like to actually feel like one of these performers. You know, we're still testing out like, where does this go? How do we reach audiences? What do we do with it? But we're in this really cool stage right now where we need lots of interesting, cool ideas. And this is the place where I think all of you come in. Because I promise you, the really cool things that happen in VR are not gonna happen just because of technologists. Technologists are an essential piece of the puzzle. But what it really takes is it takes diverse thinking from people with really different backgrounds. People who come from backgrounds in philosophy, people who come from backgrounds in kinesthetics, people who come from backgrounds in any different thing. Philosophy, sociology, anything. That mix of ideas is what creates the cool experiences. Because every cool experience, or at least what I think is a cool experience that I showed you here, was the combination of the technology with some other idea. The technology with journalism. The technology with sociology. The technology with art. It's those combinations. That's what creates the magic. And that's why I'm excited about the work that you're doing here, because I think you guys are doing some really cool things by bringing all of this stuff together. So I would love to see the ideas you have, and I would love to see the cool futures that you will create that I will want to participate in, that will blow my mind, and that I will tell people, oh, I really got my mind blown, check this out. So, thank you very much. And now we have questions. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'll start with you and then go to you and then go to you. So.
Yeah. First of all, I think it's really cool you're from Colorado. So it's really interesting evolution picture, which is quite comical. Just a man evolving back to the computer screen and to the tablet, and how the actual interaction with the technology and how people essentially learn from it and benefit from it needs to be redesigned to service this kind of old age and move forward with it. And yeah, I have to wonder though, while it is a lot more effective, you can have these different experiences, certainly when you can go look at yourself, age yourself, have interviews with people and so on, this makes some pretty cool stuff. But do you think in some ways virtual reality could collapse on itself? In the sense that you go, so I'm having this super real experience. Why did I not just walk out in the world and do this? As a counterpoint to
Yeah. Super great question. And I think that VR, if it's successful, and there's no guarantee that it will be successful, right? If it's successful as a mass medium, it will definitely face the challenge of how it competes with the real world. And I don't think it should compete with the real world. I think if anything, the great uses of VR are going to be things that enhance our experience of the real world, that make us hungry to be in the real world, rather than things that give us an alternative to the real world that we want to step away from. So I think there will be people who will probably have richer, more interesting, more meaningful lives in a virtual environment than they do in their normal day-to-day environment. That will happen. Is that a bad thing? I don't know. If it chases everyone into sort of escapism rather than real meaningful connection with each other, then yes, it's a bad thing. But again, it depends on good ideas and it depends on people who care about both of those things, human society, the environment, bringing them together, and using these experiences to trigger that desire to interact or to improve. So, but it's going to be a race, as always. Thanks. Thank you.
My question is very similar to this question, because I wonder, can you imagine a world where we live in VR only? And are you afraid of it? I mean, if VR is successful, as you said, might be, do you think we can live in VR only?
I think you can actually hold on to it because she's going to take the mic next. I'll shout. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Okay, great. If we live in VR only, VR is a failure. Okay. If we live in VR only, human society is a failure. Really. Like, and I have seen that world, like we've all seen it in things like The Matrix, you know. Maybe we're controlled by computers. But if we truly forget about connecting with the outside world, like here's an idea that's kind of cool and mind-blowing, right? There is no idea that is bigger and richer than reality, right? We can't have any conception of reality that's bigger and richer and more interesting than reality already is, right? And computers are just boxes of ideas. So no matter how cool and how deep and how interesting VR is going to be, it's always in some way a reduction of reality. And I think the cool thing comes when I talk to researchers who spend a lot of time in these environments, that they say, this experience actually makes me hungrier for reality because I see more contrast when I go out of reality. It's like stepping out of a cave, that when I come out of this environment, the real world environment is even richer to me.
Yes, to you, Ray, but what if there is someone whose reality is not that good, and then he joins the virtual reality, and this is much better for him? And he thinks, okay, today I'll stay in virtual reality because I do not want to go to work, or I do not want to live in the reality because it's not the life I can imagine or I could have in virtual reality.
Okay, I'll throw out a kind of a proposal to you for us to continue this discussion outside, because now we get into some really interesting territory. One of the arguments that comes out of cognitive science is that we are already in a virtual environment. That already what we are doing is we are just abstracting a bit of data from the reality that's around us and constructing a worldview. And there are lots of ways of showing how we're actually filling in lots of missing information all the time. We're constructing our reality all the time. You and I go into a virtual reality multiple times every day already right now. Right? Every time you look at your phone and you forget where you are, you're in a virtual reality. Every time you fall asleep and you have a dream, you're in a very, very powerful form of virtual reality. So there is a bigger question over, does it even matter? Does it even matter that some people will have these alternate lives? I don't know. Does it even matter, because what do we know about our interaction with reality other than this virtual reality that we're constantly creating? This is a little bit, maybe this is a conversation we can have in Colorado because weed is legal there. But, but we open up some really interesting ideas. And I'm not just saying like crazy, stupid, like these are genuinely interesting ideas that drive us down to ask questions about what is the nature of our experience. And it is not as clear as we think it is.
Thanks for the talk, I really liked it. I've been doing some research on empathy recently, and I think this is really spot on. But what I still wonder about is, how do you make people interested who were not interested in the first place, besides the interest for the technology itself?
Well, I think our first speaker, he can answer some interesting questions about that when it comes to, like, there's an open question of, can you make anybody interested in something that they're not already interested in? Right? And I think experiences or advertising or marketing fail, VR fails, if what you're trying to do is force someone to be interested in something that they're not already connected to, or creating an experience that doesn't touch them. So I think one of the ways we have to flip it is we have to say, where are people right now in a place where we can reach them? And how can we connect to them, and how can we give them a rich, meaningful, emotional experience for something they already want? You know, I don't think that we can force people into like doing something without traumatizing them in some way. And I think there's a lot of like good ideas of like people need to think this way that lead to people really hating to think that way. You know, that's maybe one of the lessons of this disastrous election that we just had. Really. And we have to think about that. That like by attempting to control what is the right thing to think, a lot of people get interested in the wrong thing to think. A lot of people do not want to be controlled, even if their method of rebellion is destructive. I don't know if that answers your question at all.